Hello everyone. We're halfway through 2020 and the first half of 2020 has been quite interesting so far. Yeah, let's say it like that. Starting with conspiracies about the beginning of World War III, then having a massive pandemic which got pretty much the entire population into quarantine, and it's an issue that still hasn't settled down completely. And more recently, we've had many protests in America that have gotten a bit out of hand. So, yeah, a first half that you don't easily have that often. Now, for me personally, 2020 is not a bad year. I'm probably one of the few people that says this, but honestly, this whole situation with the quarantine hasn't really affected me all that much. I mean, I'm not the type of guy that occasionally hangs out. I'm more of like a guy that stays at home. So for me, this whole situation hasn't really affected me all that much. The only thing that I've seen myself missing throughout this whole situation is live shows, but yeah, honestly, that's pretty much about it. And when it comes to music, I think it's an okay year. Nothing really that crazy. I mean, there are some quite good releases here and there, but overall I find this first half not to be one of the greatest. But I mean, it is understandable for the fact that so many releases have been delayed due to this whole coronavirus thing. So this is kind of understandable, but I actually saw myself like getting a lot into some more obscure noise releases, something that I've obviously have done to the past and I occasionally do, but I think that this year in particular I saw myself getting more into those kinds of really dark and obscure and quite rare releases. So now I'm able to present to you my top 25 albums from mid-2020 so far. This is not going to be in any particular order, this is just going to be about 25 albums that I saw myself enjoying and coming back to the most. So let's just jump straight into it. Let's start with my most recent review from an album that I literally reviewed yesterday, and that's the Set Time LP by Limewax. I've actually haven't talked about drum and bass stuff that much towards 2020, but Limewax is an artist that I always look forward to anything new he does. And I like this album, and I think it's actually one of the better works he has done in terms of a full-length album. Pretty enjoyable and pretty good result. Now let's talk about my highest rated album from this year so far, which is All Visible Objects by Moby. In my opinion, Moby actually made one of my all-time favorite albums in his entire catalog, and this is something that pleasantly surprised me, because most of the stuff from the recent era of Moby have been kind of hit or miss, but I never expect such an amazing comeback with an album that definitely has its flaws, but it has managed to just make me constantly coming back to it and loving the ideas it presents even more. It has a very nice throwback to his old school 90s sounds, and in my opinion he delivers in the best way possible with his brand new album. Spectacular result. Next up, an album that I got on vinyl, Hatari's Nestle Trance. I absolutely love this album. I think this is actually the only album from 2020 I have on physical release, apart from some 2020 represses, which that's another case. But overall, I love this album from Hatari. Easily one of my favorite agrotech and future pop releases so far. It is not a perfect album in any sort of way. There are some tracks that I don't see myself coming that much back to, but the one tracks I love, I absolutely love. Not only they're amazing, they're actually some of my most listened stuff from this year. There are so many absolutely stunning tracks. I just like how refreshing this album is with its sound, and how those gorgeous instrumentals are accompanied so well with some fantastic vocal deliveries, and also one of the most varied and most unique set of features I've seen from an album in a genre like this. So yeah, such a great result with this debut from Hatari. The next release I have over here is the self-titled split by Nick Daruma and Tosis Letalis. Such an aggressive, brutal and absolutely disgusting work, one of the essentials when it comes to this whole sound of harsh noise and harsh noise wall. I think it's a really loud, a really intense project that fans of the genre are definitely going to appreciate. Speaking of an intriguing harsh noise and harsh noise war release, there is also another split coming from the Indonesian label Gerbfast Records, with the split from the Rita and Berge Gasmati, which definitely contains one of the most intriguing works I've heard from Rita like ever, considering that there are many works from the Rita that I don't see myself enjoying. So the overall result of this short project, it's definitely really nice and it's a quite intriguing release. Next up I want to talk about this brand new release from Sacred Sun, which in my opinion ended up being my favorite release from him so far. I actually dig the approach on ambient drone music. I think the result we get with this long piece is actually spectacular, and I do actually look forward to more works like this. Next up is my favorite black metal album of the year so far, which is Nihilistic Estrangement by Forgotten Tomb. I didn't expect to like this album as much as I did, and I've actually seen myself coming back to Active Shooter a lot. This has ended up becoming my favorite black metal song of the year so far. Compared to the previous two albums, I like that this one goes back to the roots, delivering what Forgotten Tomb are known for doing best, and I think the overall result of this album ended up being surprisingly good. Next up is this collaborative project by the name of Sightless Pit with the debut Grave of a Dog. In my opinion, I definitely expected a lot from this album. It didn't end up delivering in every department, but this is definitely a quite intense and quite brutal experience in the sounds of death industrial and power electronics and dark ambient. Quite nice combination of sounds. Overall, dig the approach of this album. Next up is Poppy's I Disagree. I never actually thought that we would have this direction from Poppy. Like, there are still some pop fusions here and there were some glances in the past where it felt that she would go into this direction, but I didn't really expect that to go in a full-length album. This is actually a very intriguing and forward-thinking result in like alternative metal music with a sense of electropop and some really nice futuristic elements to the sound. Even though it had its flaws, I didn't really expect to like this as much as I did. One of the weirdest electronic, metal and classical outfits is back with a brand new album, now also incorporating elements of Arabic folk music, and the overall result makes it actually an album that is quite similar to most of the stuff we've heard from like Savage Sinusoid, so even if this ends up being a step down compared to some previous works, I think that this is still a quite fun and enjoyable album. When it comes to Nordic folk music, I actually got really impressed with Folkensage by Merkur. I definitely didn't expect that. Definitely one of my favorite albums from this year and definitely my favorite work from Merkur. The direction of just pure Nordic folk and traditional music actually paid off with her best work so far, by far. Getting into another album that was a definite step up compared to previous works was Katie Gately's Loom. This is actually an album that I didn't see myself coming that much often to it, so my rating might come down a bit compared to previously, and I don't see where this album would fit when the year ends, but we still have another middle point to go, so I think the result is still quite spectacular. I like how emotional this album is and that it has some very good results with the songwriting and how, just like I said, emotional it is with the vocals and the instrumentation. Overall a pretty nice result. Then let's talk about the quarantine anthem of this year, which is the brand new album from Charlie XCX, which actually ends up being one of my favorite works from her, if not my favorite. I like the direction that she took with this album. It contains some of the most experimental and some of the most interesting beats we've seen in her entire career, and I like how she just progresses with her whole sound and style and just keeps getting better with what she does. Really solid work over here. Next up, one of the very pleasant surprises from this year is this brand new album from Against All Logic. I think the sophomore album is miles better than the debut, even though most people might have a different opinion, but I love this new refreshing sound from Nicolas Char and how he just experiments with more industrial and just distorted elements with his sound, because it definitely makes from some of the most satisfying results I've heard in an album this year. Another great step up from this year is this brand new album from Squarepusher. In my opinion, I think this is one of the better works he has done in so many years. I've honestly never been that much of a huge fan of Squarepusher. I still don't know why. I need to get further into his discography, but overall the result of this brand new album, Be Happy Hello, I thought it was a very intriguing IDM album. Definitely dig the direction he took with this one. Another great noise release from this year is Death Rarities 1 by Control Death, from one of the legends in the noise scene, Maso Yamazaki, also known as Masona. He comes back with an album from his new project over here that goes back to some of the elements I actually liked about his debut, and I think the overall result of this album ends up paying off into two very solid tracks that are separated in multiple portions. And yeah, very intriguing work. King Dude also made an impressive comeback this year with Full Virgo Moon definitely being one of my favorite works he has ever done, because it is back to the pure folk sound. We don't have any more of those electric guitars and those very awkward sort of gothic rock elements. We have another pure simplistic neo-folk album over here, and it works amazingly. One of my favorite works from this year. Next up is Ice Pick, with their brand new album being another great work. I still haven't found a project from them that would be either underwhelming or like that much overwhelming. I think we just get into the middle ground, which is not necessarily a bad thing since the results are still quite fascinating with the production, with the vocals. There are still so many nice elements that Ice Pick present. A collaboration that I didn't expect, and it works fascinatingly well, with Factronic by Jimmy Urine and Serge Sakian, which is the absolute banging soundtrack for an animation series that doesn't even exist. And it just works so well as a soundtrack, and both of them really know how to make one. It is catchy, it is dense, and overall it is a great result. Next up is the new album from Japanese hardcore band Envy, who they still don't disappoint after all of those years. I think we have another pretty solid work over here. Even though it gets a bit repetitive quite fast, I still quite enjoy the overall result of this album. We also have a new album from Dreamcrusher, being one of their greatest works ever so far, with Panopticon just being one continuous track separated in so many different sections that are just so aggressive and so blood pumping. It is actually quite an insane project that I really like. Definitely my most surprised release from this year has to be this brand new album from Code Orange. Considering I wasn't a fan of their previous works, I thought they were kind of mediocre for the genre. So I really don't know what's with this album in particular, but this is the one that managed to click with me. The production to this thing, the sounds, all of the imaginative glitchy portions, and even some of the directions they take with the instrumentation, with the styles or the vocals. It made up for an album that I would never expect I would enjoy as much as I did. One of the most bizarre electronic krautrock projects, whatever you want to call it, it's back. Sit and Shine with Cynic Farm, a really interesting album to say the least, definitely having some quite intriguing moments to it, still being bizarre, still being out there, still just being confusing in their own unique way. Another impressive collaboration is this brand new album from Passenger of Shit and Ethereal Girl, and it's been a while since I've enjoyed a project from Passenger of Shit that much. And I think that this whole project, even though it's a bit longer than what I want to, for the most part it works quite well, and I think it's one of the more balanced and the more consistent projects I've heard from Passenger of Shit so far. And finally we have a quite underrated album from this year, which is the brand new Algiers. I really haven't seen so many people just talking that much about this brand new album, and so many just find it being quite underwhelming. However, for me, it ended up being a quite decent and quite intriguing work. It certainly has its flaws, but overall, I think the direction they took with this album certainly paid off, and it's another intriguing work from a band that overall takes a lot of risks and likes developing with so many different sounds and styles being put all together. So that's all I have for today. This is my list, and let me know what's your favorite albums of 2020 so far down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.